Over 100 comments on the last major Imperial Navy video couldn't agree on one question. Is the manual loading of macrocannon shells confirmed Warhammer 40,000 lore? Or is it a meme that's been photocopied so many times the original is gone? One commenter put it plainly: this might be a meme dialed to 11 due to Chinese whispers and historical drift. Another came back at them with, there is no way you're using human power to load asteroid-sized shells in a setting where spacecraft have existed for 10,000 years. Both of them were right, and both of them missed the darker truth underneath. That's the investigation. That's what this video is actually for. Not a love letter to grimdark aesthetics, not a list of impressive ship names, a prosecution. Because the answer isn't that the system is broken, the answer is that it's working perfectly. And the proof of that is sitting in a shipyard the Imperial Navy will never be allowed to enter. Start with what's confirmed. Macrocannons are edifice-scale weapons. The Warhammer 40,000 wiki describes them as giant, edifice-sized weapons covered with gantries, cranes, power lines, and pipes, manned by a crew that stands hundreds strong. Building-sized guns, hundreds of humans. That's not community speculation. That's the established description. The infrastructure is there: the gantries, the cranes, the pipes. Partial mechanical assistance exists in the architecture of the thing, and yet the crew count is still in the hundreds per weapon in a military operating spacecraft that have crossed galaxies. Now for the contested part. Lore narratives depicting Imperial Navy gunnery operations, circulating primarily through community content, with a source chain running through a QAnon 40K video citing an unidentified Black Library novel, describe firing cadences and loading arrangements that the community has debated for years. Community consensus estimates shell weights in the hundreds of kilograms. A firing cadence of roughly 45 seconds appears in those same narratives. And a loading crew organized into 4 distinct specialization tiers, a detail sourced to the same unverified narrative chain as the cadence and shell weight figures. The Bolter and Chainsword forum thread from August 2020 is explicit. No canonical timing data has ever been resolved. The specific figures, 140 kilograms, 45 seconds, can't be confirmed from any primary codex source in the available record. The underlying novel has never been identified by name. So here is where the canon versus meme question actually lands. The broad strokes are confirmed. Edifice-scale weapons, hundreds of crew, manual human labor as the operational baseline. The specific numbers circulating in the community are sourced to lore narratives that haven't been traced to primary text. Responsible viewers should know that. The community arguing over 140 kilograms versus some other weight is arguing over the precise depth of a pit they all agree exists. Pretend for a moment the loading numbers are in the right order of magnitude, which the edifice scale description strongly implies they are. You have human beings performing repeated, heavy lifts in confined ballistic environments. Lore narratives describe 12-hour shifts, a figure with no identified primary source. The same goes for claims about loaders receiving rations below every other crew tier, also unverified, also without a traceable source. 4 specialization roles attributed to that single unverified narrative chain rather than multiple independent accounts, numbered in some tellings not by name but by function, the way you'd number machine components rather than people. The reason the community couldn't stop engaging with this specific topic is that the scene is viscerally legible. You don't need confirmed kilograms to feel the weight of what's being described. One detail from those same lore narratives that the research record can't verify, but which keeps appearing: a loader who died 3 weeks into service in a recoil zone, named in one account, though that name and that narrative can't be confirmed in any published novel. The category is real regardless. Recoil zones exist in the description of these weapons, and the physical consequence of an uncoordinated human being in a space where a building-sized gun is cycling at close interval isn't hard to calculate. Whether any specific named individual is canon or community narrative, someone who fits that description has existed in this system 10,000 times over. Before the argument about the loading system goes further, one framing note on the ships themselves. Because the question has been raised, why do these gun-heavy capital ships make sense at all in a space combat context? The answer is straightforward, and the audience engagement data confirms it resonated. In void warfare, you want armor between you and the void. Carriers rely on strike craft that have to survive exposure to the vacuum, to enemy point defense, to the distances involved in reaching a target. A battleship brings its weapons with it, protected inside meters of void-hardened hull. Battlefleet Gothic, the official 40K fleet combat system, is built around this doctrine. Heavy guns, heavy armor, direct fire lanes. The ships are rational, the system running them is the problem. The Imperial Navy does not operate in a technological vacuum. Two roles that the last major video conflated and which the Lore Accuracy Patrol flagged immediately. Navigators and astropaths aren't the same thing and aren't interchangeable. Navigators come from the Navis Nobilite gene line. They possess a physical third eye sensitive to the warp, and their function is singular, guiding ships through warp space during faster-than-light travel. Without one, a warp jump isn't risky, it's catastrophic. Astropaths are something entirely different. Psychic humans who undergo soul binding, a ritual involving direct exposure to the Emperor's psychic presence through the Golden Throne. Soul binding typically renders them physically blind. Their function is communication, sending and receiving psychic messages across interstellar distances. Navigators fly the ship through the warp. Astropaths talk to other ships and planets across the void. Biologically different, functionally different, institutionally different. The competitor got this wrong. Now you know the correct answer. The same rigor applies to Gloriana-class flagships. During the Great Crusade, approximately M30, 10,000 years before the current 40K setting, each Space Marine Legion operated roughly one flagship-class vessel of this scale. The competitor's video claimed Rabute Gilliman issued a broad ban on Gloriana-class ships. He didn't. There is no such ban in canon. The reason Glorianas are now extremely rare is 10,000 years of attrition and the loss of STC data needed to build replacements. You can't manufacture what you've forgotten how to manufacture. The scarcity is explained by the same institutional decay that explains everything else in the Imperium, not by a policy decision from a Primarch who was in stasis for the majority of the time these ships were being destroyed. On the Eternal Crusader, the Black Templar's flagship, the situation is genuinely contested. Aaron Dembski-Bowden's novel Hell's Reach refers to it as a battle barge. Some community sources classify it as Gloriana class. A definitive canonical source, explicitly overriding the Hell's Reach designation, hasn't been found in the available record. The confidence that such an override source even exists sits at roughly 40%. Handle it as the lore treats it, a contested classification, not a resolved one. The honest position is that the Eternal Crusader's class designation has conflicting sources and hasn't been authoritatively settled. That's not a weakness in the argument, it's what the lore actually says. Now back to the gun decks. Because there's one detail about who's crewing these ships that sharpens the loading question to a point. Failed Space Marine aspirants, recruits who went through the beginning of the Astartes creation process and washed out, retain some of the surgical enhancements they received before rejection. Partial modifications, improved physiology. Many of them end up serving in naval crews. This is confirmed across multiple codex entries, and community engagement on this point was essentially flat. Near zero friction, meaning near universal acceptance. It's settled lore. So you have naval crews that include post-human biology, people who received surgical enhancement toward a superhuman standard who carry those modifications into their naval service. And on those ships, based on the same lore narratives that describe the loading conditions, no automated loading mechanism, no pulley system rigged to reduce the human load. The gantries and cranes described in the wiki exist as infrastructure around the weapon, infrastructure that, despite its presence, hasn't eliminated the need for hundreds of human crew. What's confirmed is that surgically enhanced washouts serve in fleet crews generally. What's confirmed is that those fleet crews operate on ships where edifice-sized guns are loaded by human labor. Whether the enhanced washouts are specifically in the loading role or deployed elsewhere on the same ships, a system that fields post-human biology anywhere in that chain while maintaining manual loading on its gun decks is making a structural choice. Not facing a capability limit, making a choice. That's the first layer of the argument. Here's the second. The Imperium has access to warships that operate at a technological level the Navy will never touch. The clearest example is the Ark Mechanicus. The Adeptus Mechanicus controls a class of vessel, the Ark Mechanicus, that represents the upper limit of what the Imperium's shipbuilding knowledge can produce. These are massive, ancient ships, and community engagement on the comparison was the single highest traction data point in the prior video's comment section. Viewers came to the competitor's video specifically asking where the Ark Mechanicus was in the power hierarchy. They never got an answer. Here is the honest version of that answer. The research record returned 0 confirmed specifications for the Speranza's internal weapon systems or automation levels. Any specific number, specific automation percentages, specific gun configurations would be fabricated. The brief is explicit about this, and so is the research. Don't claim confirmed specs that don't exist in the available sources. What is confirmed? The Adeptus Mechanicus hoards advanced technology as doctrinal practice. This isn't a byproduct of their theology. It's central to it. The Omnissiah doctrine treats knowledge as sacred property to be preserved, controlled, and rationed by the Mechanicus alone. The Navy depends on the Mechanicus for ship maintenance, for the ritual upkeep of their engines and weapons. The Mechanicus does not share Ark Mechanicus grade capabilities with the Navy, not because the Navy couldn't use them, because the Mechanicus won't give them access. So the question isn't whether the Imperium contains technological capability beyond what runs on those gun decks. The Ark Mechanicus demonstrates that it does. The question is why the Navy operates on a human-fed loading cycle when that technology exists somewhere in the Imperium. And the Mechanicus's answer, encoded in doctrine, in institutional theology, in 10,000 years of deliberate technical gatekeeping, is that the Navy doesn't get to know what better looks like. That gap between what exists in Mechanicus vaults and what gets issued to naval crews isn't negligence. It's a structural feature. The Mechanicus controls the most advanced ships in the Imperium and keeps them. The Navy gets what the Mechanicus decides to maintain for them. And what the Mechanicus decides to maintain for the Navy includes edifice-sized guns loaded by human bodies on a cadence measured in seconds. Now the servitor question, because this is where the system stops looking like institutional failure and starts looking like institutional optimization. Servitors are a confirmed part of the 40,000 setting. They are converted humans, individuals who have been surgically and mechanically altered by the Adeptus Mechanicus into semi-autonomous work units. Lobotomized, wired into machinery, stripped of independent function. The Mechanicus converts broken or exhausted individuals into servitors. This is documented general practice, not disputed anywhere in the available lore record. The specific claim that the Imperial Navy operates a deliberate pipeline converting broken loaders into servitors as stated institutional policy, that claim hasn't been confirmed from primary sources. The research is explicit about this. Confidence sits at 0.20. The direct quote, "The Navy was recycling us, literally, turning broken loaders into mindless servo-automata. It was efficient, it was economical, lacks a verified primary source." Whether this represents deliberate designed consumption or the incidental outcome of a brutal system is, the research notes, lore interpretation rather than explicit canon statement. Present it as what it's. The Mechanicus converts broken and exhausted individuals into servitors. Naval gunnery crews operate under conditions that break and exhaust people. The connection between those two facts is, at minimum, structurally implied. Whether it rises to the level of deliberate institutional policy or represents the natural logic of a system that treats human bodies as inputs is a distinction the lore hasn't been forced to resolve. The sourcing gap on this one is honest, so frame it honestly. What the sourcing gap does not change is the functional outcome. Whether designed or emergent, the system produces the same result: a crew that is consumed and a Mechanicus waiting at the other end to repurpose what's left. The damage control defense, that warm bodies fix hull breaches that automation can't, is real and worth acknowledging. Human redundancy has genuine tactical value in a setting where void-sealed automated systems fail catastrophically when breached. But the servitor pipeline isn't about redundancy. If the goal were redundancy, the exhausted loader would be rotated out, rested, returned to service. The servitor conversion is a one-way transformation. You don't put a servitor back in a loading role. You've replaced a person with a machine component. That's consumption, not rotation. And here's where the feedback loop claim sits. The idea that loader testimony gets extracted to implement protocols that push loaders slightly harder, creating a literal optimization loop for suffering. This has the highest dramatic value in the entire script and the weakest sourcing chain. The research found no primary source for it. If it appears in a Black Library novel, that novel hasn't been identified. Present it as the interpretive frame it's. In a setting where the Mechanicus extracts biological data from converted servitors as a matter of course, the logical extension of that practice to living crew is thematically consistent with everything else in this institutional picture. But the specific mechanic can't be confirmed, and claiming it as canon will invite the lore accuracy patrol to end the conversation at exactly the moment it should be landing hardest. The idea stands on its own as implication. It doesn't need to be stated as fact. Pull back for a moment to see the whole shape of what's been described. The Imperial Navy operates gun platforms that require hundreds of human beings per weapon. The ships are architecturally rational for void warfare, heavy armor, direct fire, built around the doctrine that Battlefleet Gothic formalizes. The people loading those guns work under conditions that lore narratives describe as brutal, on a cadence and with a weight that the community has debated for years without canonical resolution, on the understood basis that the edifice-scale guns and the hundreds of crew are confirmed regardless of the specific numbers. Naval crews that include individuals with partial post-human modifications from the Space Marine washout process serve on these ships, and the absence of mechanical loading assistance in that context is a choice the system has made. The Adeptus Mechanicus controls ships that dwarf what the Navy fields and withholds the technology that runs them. The Mechanicus converts broken individuals into servitors as documented practice, and the Navy's gunnery crews produce broken individuals at a rate the system has never seen a reason to reduce. Each Gloriana-class ship that's been lost over 10,000 years of attrition took irreplaceable knowledge with it, because the STC data needed to build replacements no longer exists. The scarcity of the most powerful ships in the Imperium's history isn't a policy decision. It's the accumulated result of fighting a 10,000-year war with no industrial base capable of recovery. And at the bottom of that supply chain, in the gun decks of vessels that will never be replaced, human beings are loading shells the size of small vehicles on a cycle measured in seconds. Gilliman didn't ban the ships that could have replaced this. There is no such ban in canon. The Glorianas were lost to attrition, one by one, over 10,000 years, and the STC data needed to build new ones went with them. The Mechanicus didn't sabotage the Navy's automation. They simply declined to share what they had, every year, for 10,000 years, which accomplishes the same thing, and it's worth being precise about what that means. The Mechanicus is a separate institution with its own religious doctrine, and what looks like withholding from the outside is, from the inside, the Omnissiah's law. The dysfunction is real. The choice is structural rather than conspiratorial. This isn't grimderp. Grimderp is when a setting is brutally dark because no one thought through the implications. What the Imperium's logistics describe, when you follow the sourcing carefully and present the confirmed facts honestly, and frame the interpretive claims as exactly that, is a system in which every institutional actor is behaving according to their own internal logic. The Mechanicus hoards technology because their theology demands it. The Navy uses human labor because that's what the Mechanicus allows. The loaders are broken and repurposed because the system has no mechanism for valuing them otherwise. The Gloriana-class ships are gone because 10,000 years of attrition with no viable replacement program is how entropy works. The dysfunction is the product. Not because someone designed it to be, because every actor in the system optimized for their own institutional survival, and the output of all those local optimizations is a military that grinds through human beings at a rate that would be unthinkable if anyone were keeping score. The Imperium isn't a broken empire failing to achieve its goals. It's a functional one achieving exactly what its structure incentivizes: the preservation of institutional power by the people who hold it at the cost of the people who don't. Which brings the argument to its natural terminus and its natural unanswered question. If the Imperium, with its 10,000 years of institutional infrastructure and its millions of conscripted crew and its Mechanicus-maintained fleets, produces this as its operational baseline, what does the Chaos Navy run on? Heretic Astartes fleets take losses. They replace crew. Their ships require maintenance. Demon engines exist, and Chaos warbands presumably operate differently than a straight human conscript model. But whether demonic influence genuinely reduces crew requirements, and what gets traded in exchange, the available sources don't settle. The specific mechanisms, how Chaos forces recover fleet losses, whether demonic possession genuinely replaces the need for conventional crew, what the consumption model looks like on the other side of that line, the research doesn't answer it. That gap isn't a failure of research, it's the reason the question is worth asking. The Imperium system is horrifying, and it barely works. The Chaos alternative presumably involves its own set of costs. Different costs, denominated in currencies the Imperium hasn't adopted. What does a military that's genuinely not worried about the souls of its crew look like from the inside, operationally? What gets traded away and what gets gained? That's the next investigation. Subscribe if you want to be there when it runs.